The penthouse sat atop Manhattan like a glass crown, cold and silent. From its panoramic windows, the city pulsed with an electric, vibrant life that never breached the sterile perfection within. Polished marble floors reflected the muted grey sky, stretching across vast, empty spaces, punctuated by steel beams and minimalist furniture that felt more like museum installations than pieces of a home. This was Arthur Vance's world, a meticulously curated fortress of wealth and control. But it was a fortress devoid of warmth. The air itself was still, carrying the oppressive weight of unspoken grief and quiet resignation. When the heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, the sound was swallowed by the silence, announcing the return of the master to a kingdom that offered him everything but solace. A home that operated with the precision of a boardroom but lacked the simple comfort of a family. It was in this suffocating quiet that the sound first reached him, an anomaly so foreign he almost dismissed it. It was the sound of pure, uninhibited laughter, a child's genuine joy, echoing faintly from the far wing of the apartment. Arthur froze mid-stride, his briefcase slipping from his grip. Laughter was not a currency traded in this house. The only sounds were the hum of the climate control and the distant city traffic. He moved toward the source, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick rugs. Each step down the long, art-lined hallway felt like a trespass into an unknown territory. He wasn't a father approaching his daughter. He was an explorer, discovering a new world. A sound that promised a life he had long since accepted was impossible for the little girl he kept hidden away from the world and, in many ways, from himself. He stopped at the threshold of Clara's room, concealed by the shadows of the doorway. The scene that unfolded before him stole the air from his lungs. On the floor, a few feet away, sat Maya Diaz, her arms outstretched, her face illuminated by an encouraging smile that seemed to radiate a tangible warmth. And there, holding onto a small white chair, was his daughter, Clara, the girl whose muscles the nation's top specialists had declared would never properly develop, was standing on her own. As Arthur watched, paralyzed, she let go, her tiny legs wobbling with a monumental effort. She took one hesitant step, then another, a clumsy, miraculous shuffle toward Maya, before tumbling softly onto the plush carpet, erupting in another peal of delighted laughter. The sight was a physical blow, a beautiful impossibility that defied every grim medical report he had ever paid for. In that single moment, the armor Arthur had worn for 5 long years shattered into a million pieces. The image of his daughter defying her prognosis didn't just move him, it fundamentally broke him. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him, a surge of disbelief so profound it felt like a dream, followed by a dizzying euphoria that was almost painful. Then came the guilt, a cold, crushing weight in his chest. He saw with blinding clarity the depth of his own surrender, the years he had spent mourning a life for her that he never fought for. He had accepted the doctor's words as gospel, building a prison of limitations around her. Yet this young woman, with nothing but patience and belief, had unlocked a door he never even knew existed, revealing just how bankrupt his own hope had become. He stepped into the room, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sterile air of the penthouse was suddenly thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 5 years. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, welled in his eyes, blurring the image of his daughter sitting happily on the floor. His voice, a tool he used to command boardrooms and sway markets, came out as a broken whisper, a single word directed at Maya that carried the weight of 1,000 questions he was too afraid to ask. How? He sank to his knees, the fine fabric of his suit creasing on the plush carpet, and pulled his daughter into an embrace that was both a reunion and an apology. He held her as if he were trying to absorb the miracle of her strength, the warmth of her small body, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness he had carried for so long. The memory of the hospital was a ghost that never left him. It haunted the silent corridors of his home and the quiet moments between meetings. He remembered the blindingly white walls, the incessant beeping of machines, and the impossible silence after his wife, Eleanor, was gone. She had given him a daughter and had been taken in the same breath, leaving him with a fragile life intertwined with unbearable loss. The doctors had delivered the news of Clara's condition with clinical detachment. Their words about muscle deficiencies and developmental impossibilities piling onto his grief until it became a fortress. He had accepted their prognosis as a final, unchangeable verdict, a penance he had to pay. He had failed to save his wife, and so he accepted that he would fail to give his daughter a normal life, locking his heart away to prevent it from breaking any further. Maya Diaz, on the other hand, had never learned the language of defeat. She grew up in a small, bustling apartment in Queens, where hope was not a luxury but a necessity, a tool for survival as essential as the subway pass in her pocket. Her passion for physical therapy was born from personal experience, from the long months she spent helping her own grandmother learn to walk again after a debilitating stroke. She had witnessed firsthand how stubborn, patient love could coax life back into tired limbs. She saw the same spark of potential in Clara that she had seen in her grandmother, a quiet resilience waiting for someone to believe in it. For Maya, CUNY textbooks on neuroplasticity were not just theories. They were promises, a scientific explanation for the miracles she knew were possible through simple, unwavering human connection and encouragement. That evening, Arthur didn't retreat to his office as usual. He sat on the floor, an awkward, imposing figure in a world of colorful wooden blocks and soft toys, and he simply watched. He listened as Maya spoke to Clara, her voice a gentle, encouraging melody that seemed to bypass logic and speak directly to the child's spirit. She didn't treat Clara like a patient with a list of deficits. She treated her like a collaborator in a grand adventure. They weren't doing exercises. They were playing a game to help a baby bear find its way home. They weren't stretching muscles. They were reaching for the stars. Arthur watched, mesmerized, as Maya transformed a clinical routine into a ritual of joy and belief. A process so pure, it felt sacred. It's amazing how one person's faith can change everything, isn't it? If you feel that way too, please consider subscribing so we can keep sharing stories that prove it. The next day, Arthur approached Maya with a proposal, the only way he knew how to express the magnitude of what she had done. He offered her a check with enough zeros to erase her student loans, buy a house for her family, and secure her future for decades to come. He presented it not as a salary, but as a token of a gratitude so immense it couldn't be articulated. In his world, money was the ultimate solution, the most powerful language, capable of solving any problem and rewarding any feat. He saw the offer as a grand, desperate gesture, his way of acknowledging that she had given him something his entire fortune could not procure. It was his attempt to place a value on the priceless, a way to say thank you without having to navigate the unfamiliar territory of his own raw emotions. Maya looked at the check in his hand, and for the first time since he'd met her, her warm smile faltered. A flicker of hurt crossed her face, quickly replaced by a gentle but firm resolve. She shook her head softly, pushing his hand away. She explained that her connection with Clara wasn't a service she provided or a task she completed. It was a bond, a relationship built on trust and affection, not financial incentive. She worried that such an enormous sum would fundamentally change things, turning her act of love into a transaction and erecting a wall of wealth and expectation between them. What Clara needed, she said, was not a highly paid miracle worker, but someone who genuinely believed in her. Her refusal was not an act of pride, but of protection, a quiet defense of the purity of their connection. Arthur was left speechless, the check feeling heavy and useless in his hand. No one had ever refused his money before. He had built an empire on the principle that everything and everyone had a price. Maya's rejection was a quiet earthquake, shaking the very foundations of his understanding of the world. It forced him to confront a startling truth. He was fluent in the language of finance and power, but he was an absolute novice in the language of the human heart. He had tried to offer his gratitude with the only tool he possessed, and in doing so, he had almost insulted the very thing he was so grateful for. A profound sense of inadequacy washed over him as he realized that to truly thank her, he would have to learn a whole new way of communicating, one that involved vulnerability instead of wealth. His confusion was soon compounded by a call from Dr. Albright, the renowned pediatric neurologist whose grim prognosis had defined Clara's life. Arthur explained the recent developments, his voice filled with a cautious optimism. The doctor's response was a splash of cold water. He was dismissive, attributing Clara's progress to a temporary neurological fluke, and warning Arthur against the dangers of unfounded hope offered by an unqualified caregiver. He insisted that accepting the child's limitations was the kindest path forward, a way to avoid inevitable future disappointment. The doctor's skepticism was a powerful external validation of Arthur's deepest fears, the cynical voice of his own past grief telling him that this newfound joy was fragile, a beautiful illusion destined to shatter and leave him broken once again. But something had shifted within him. The image of his daughter's laughing face was more powerful than the doctor's clinical warnings. That night, he knelt on the floor beside Maya, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He felt clumsy and out of place, his large hands fumbling with the small toys. He tried to sing the simple, silly songs Maya used, his baritone voice awkward and off-key. He followed her instructions, helping Clara with the gentle movements, his touch hesitant at first, then growing more confident. In that moment, he was not a CEO or a billionaire. He was just a father, learning, for the very first time, how to play with his child. He was terrified of doing it wrong, but for the first time in 5 years, he was more afraid of not trying at all. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the cold penthouse began to change. The transformation started not with a grand redecoration, but with small, meaningful additions. A brightly colored playmat appeared in the center of the vast living room, a stark contrast to the polished marble. Children's books began to populate the minimalist shelves, their cheerful spines breaking up the rows of austere art volumes. The oppressive silence was gradually replaced by the sounds of life, the soft thud of a toy, the melody of a nursery rhyme, and, most importantly, the frequent, joyful sound of Clara's laughter. Arthur found himself rearranging his schedule, pushing back international calls and cancelling late-night meetings to be home for what Maya called the magic hour, that precious time before bed filled with stories and cuddles. These moments became the building blocks of a new foundation. He learned the specific way Clara liked her oatmeal, the name of her favorite stuffed elephant, and the story that always made her giggle. He was present when she pointed at him and clearly said "Dada" for the first time, a simple word that felt more significant than any multi-billion-dollar merger he had ever orchestrated. He discovered that his daughter had a mischievous sense of humor and a surprisingly stubborn streak. He was no longer just observing her life from a distance, a benevolent but detached benefactor. He was an active participant, a student learning the intricate, beautiful details of the small person who was his daughter. And in doing so, he began to rediscover the man he was before grief had hollowed him out. Maya became more than just a caregiver. She evolved into a bridge, connecting a father and daughter who had been separated by a chasm of unspoken pain. She didn't just teach Clara exercises. She taught Arthur how to see beyond the diagnosis and connect with the child. She showed him that his presence was more valuable than any specialist he could hire, and that his belief was the most potent therapy of all. For his part, Arthur began to see Maya not as an employee to be managed, but as a partner and a guide. He started asking for her opinion, not just about Clara's routine, but about his own fumbling attempts to be a father. A fragile, unspoken trust began to form between them, a quiet alliance dedicated to nurturing the miracle she had awakened. It's incredible how a single person can change the course of a family's story. By subscribing, you help us bring more of these powerful journeys of connection to light. The moment was as ordinary as it was devastating. Clara, emboldened by weeks of progress, was taking a series of confident steps across the living room floor, her small face a mask of intense concentration. Arthur was kneeling a few feet away, his hands outstretched, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it was almost a physical ache. It happened in an instant. Her little foot caught on the edge of the rug, and she tumbled forward, a soft, clumsy fall onto the plush carpet. There was no real injury, only the shock of unexpected gravity. But her cry was not one of pain. It was a wail of frustration and fear. In that sound, Arthur heard the echo of every dire prognosis, every skeptical specialist. The newfound light in his world flickered, and the cold shadow of his old despair threatened to swallow him whole. That single event was enough to send him spiraling. He retreated to his office, the doctor's number already dialed, his voice strained as he described the incident. Dr. Albright's response was a clinical blade, sharp and devoid of sympathy. He spoke of inevitable plateaus and the dangers of false hope. "As I cautioned you, Mr. Vance," the doctor said, his tone dripping with condescending authority, "these were likely temporary neurological flukes. The underlying condition remains. The kindest thing you can do is adjust your expectations to prevent further disappointment for both of you." Each word was a hammer blow, methodically rebuilding the walls around Arthur's heart. He hung up the phone, feeling a profound, chilling sense of defeat, the doctor's professional skepticism giving voice to the deepest, most terrified part of his own soul. Was this all just a beautiful, fleeting dream? He found Maya in Clara's room, sitting on the floor beside the little girl, who was now quietly stacking blocks, refusing to even look at the small chair she had used for support. Arthur stood in the doorway, a ghost in his own home, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. His voice, when it came, was raw and broken. He said, "I was wrong to hope," he confessed. The words tasting like ash. He said it was temporary. He finally looked at Maya, his carefully constructed composure shattered. "I offered you that money because it's all I know how to do. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be what she needs. I was so afraid of failing her, of seeing that light in her eyes go out, and now it has, and it's my fault." Maya looked up from the floor, her gaze steady and filled with a compassion that cut through his panic. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, she spoke a simple, profound truth. "You're looking for the wrong miracle, Arthur," she said softly. "The miracle wasn't that Clara took a few steps. The miracle is that she laughed while she was trying. The miracle is that you were on the floor waiting for her. She doesn't need a father who can guarantee she'll never fall. She needs a father who will be there to pick her up when she does. She needs to know that your love isn't dependent on whether she can walk or not. Your presence is the therapy, Arthur. Your belief is the cure. That is what she needs from you." Her words landed not as an accusation, but as an absolution. For the first time, Arthur understood. The goal wasn't a perfect outcome. It was an unwavering connection. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for 5 years. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer had power over him. He walked into the room and slowly lowered himself to the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling as he sat cross-legged beside his daughter and the woman who had saved them both. He didn't ask Clara to walk. He didn't mention the exercises. He simply picked up a blue block and gently tapped it against hers. A moment passed, and then another. Finally, a small, hesitant giggle escaped Clara's lips. It was the quietest sound. But in the silent penthouse, it was a thunderous declaration of a new beginning. Seeing a family heal like this reminds us of what's truly important. If these stories touch your heart, subscribing helps us continue to share them with the world. A few weeks later, Arthur approached Maya not with a check, but with a blueprint. He didn't offer her a reward. He offered her a partnership. He had channeled his immense resources into creating a new philanthropic arm of his company, an organization dedicated to a radically different approach to pediatric therapy. He called it the Clara Vance Foundation. Its mission was to fund research and provide grants for alternative, humanized treatments that combined cutting-edge technology with the simple, powerful compassion that Maya had shown him. He asked her to be its first director, not as an employee, but as the visionary leader who would guide its purpose. This time, when he offered her a future, it wasn't one she could buy, but one she could build for countless others. Her quiet nod of acceptance was a silent promise between them. The cold, glass fortress atop Manhattan began its final, most profound transformation. It became a home. Brightly colored, custom-built ramps and handrails were integrated seamlessly into the minimalist design, turning the vast spaces into an accessible, joyful playground. The oppressive silence was permanently banished, replaced by the constant, cheerful soundtrack of a child's life, the whir of a toy car, the sing-song cadence of a story being read aloud, and the ever-present echo of Clara's laughter. Arthur's schedule, once a rigid testament to corporate dominance, was now a fluid document built around his daughter. International calls were rescheduled after she was asleep, and board meetings were cut short so he could be home for dinner. He wasn't just a father in title. He was a father in practice, present for every small triumph and every tiny stumble. As director of the foundation, Maya's quiet belief found a global voice. She used the resources not to enrich herself, but to amplify her impact, creating programs that trained other therapists in her methods. She traveled to conferences, not as a celebrity, but as a passionate advocate, sharing the simple truth that a child's potential is unlocked first through connection, not just clinical intervention. The foundation became a beacon of hope for families who had been told to give up, funding centers where children were seen as individuals, not as collections of symptoms. Maya never lost the gentle humility that had first reached Clara. She was simply doing on a larger scale what she had always done, seeing the person behind the diagnosis and patiently, lovingly coaxing out the miracle she knew was always there. Arthur, too, found a new purpose beyond the boardroom. He began speaking publicly, not about pharmaceutical profits, but about the urgent need for empathy in medicine. He told his story, a powerful testimony to how the greatest advancements in science are meaningless without the human touch. The penthouse was no longer a monument to his wealth, but a testament to his healing, a home filled with the warmth of a new, unconventional family. He, Maya, and Clara had built a life together, proving that the most profound recoveries are not of the body, but of the soul. A story like this shows that the deepest connections can heal the deepest wounds, and by subscribing, you ensure that we can continue to share these powerful reminders of hope with the world.